next speaker is Adrian Mandzy. He's assistant professor of history at Morehead University in Kentucky. At the present, teaches history, several other subjects. What's not listed on the program is that he used to wear the maple leaf like me, the state park's logo, or used to be our logo. He worked in our State Historic Preservation Office back in 1999-2000, reviewing archaeological sites, projects. Right? Adrian visited Fort Ontario, I think it was 2 summers ago, and he had the misfortune of running into me in the museum shop talking about books. The second mistake was talking about the Battlefield Archaeology conference that he was speaking at, that I heard about, which brings us to today. He offered to speak, and he walked right into the trap. Today he'll be talking about 2 wars, 2 battlefields. He couldn't decide on one. They're both, in a way, related to Oswego and Fort Ontario. Blue Lexington, Kentucky in 1782 was the last significant action of the War for Independence, and it resulted in the deaths of 77 colonists. What attracted me to this subject was the tie-in to Fort Ontario, which was the objective of the last Continental Army campaign of the Revolutionary War ordered by General Washington in February 1783. We all know that ended in failure because really attacking Oswego in February, coming up from Mohawk Valley, very tough. The 1864 Battle of the Crater also intrigued me because of Oswego's great contributions in manpower and regiments to the Union Army during the war, and the heavy casualties people from here endured, especially in the Siege of Petersburg, which is part of the campaign that Adrian will talk about. And Adrian called me last week in a very unusual windstorm and asked me if it was the kind of conference where the speaker reads their paper, like an academic thing. I just laughed. So it's not an academic. Here the audience expect you to have fun, because they want to have fun, and to bring a fishing pole, like my friend Andrea Crees, who just retired from archaeology, drop a line in the river behind the hotel during breaks. It's Oswego, New York. It's a paradise for history geeks, fishermen, and fisherwomen. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian Mandzy.
Hi, how are you guys doing today? Great. Awesome. All right, I'm going to show some pictures. I got a bunch of slides I put together. I figured I could just talk about some of this stuff. Some will be, if it's familiar to you, just enjoy the pictures. If it's something new, we'll just play with it. All right, so I've been doing battlefield archaeology for about 20-something years now. And I do a lot with how history and how historians have looked at it. And people have been looking at battlefields for a very long time. A lot of times they're trying to duplicate those kind of successes. So you have a lot of institutions, military institutions, trying to follow up on what happened beforehand. In the 19th century, people are looking at battlefields for a little bit different reason. It goes beyond just duplication of military glory. It looks at actually trying to better understanding what had happened. We also have this kind of national myths being created. Battlefields become holy places where people patronize and go to. You have this in the United States, you have this in Canada, you're going to have this in Europe. It becomes a place that you take your kids, it's something you do on a vacation. So battlefields are growing as a fun thing to do. Right? Modern battlefields are sort of easy to find. They're all over the place. Look at the marker, right? That usually is in the general area. Right? Sometimes you would have chance discoveries. You would have mass graves being popped up. Sometimes you'd have ruined walls. Tells it, oh, here was a fort or something of that nature. Ooh, that didn't look really good. That looked a lot better in my computer earlier. Okay. Usually there'd be a handful of things that are found, right? A bayonet, a couple of buttons, maybe a barrel here or there. You have archaeologists saying, well, there's nothing you can really learn from doing anything with battlefields. Go help build on it. It doesn't really matter. Noel Hume's sort of like the best example of that, but there's other people who sort of follow this idea that there's nothing really there, nothing you can really learn. And we have some questions, right? Why is it so hard to find them, right? Because, well, part of it is, what happens after a battle? Everything gets looted. Today we think of just take the modern day weapons. If you're walking down the street and there's a musket lying on the ground, would you not pick it up? I know I would. All right? In the 18th century or the 17th century, everything gets stripped, right? Iron is worth its weight in gold. Today we have teeth, or most of us do. If we don't, we just go to the dentist. In the 19th century, people are actually collecting teeth from battlefield to replace the teeth that they've already lost. And there's such a market for it, especially the British do this in the first half of the 19th century. The Waterloo teeth that you see there not only are stripped from Waterloo, but freaking any other battle that happened during the Napoleonic Wars. You have mass, stripping of parts. So anything that could make a buck would be stripped. Also local communities that survived when the armies went through, any kind of animals they lost, buildings they lost, clothing they lost, they made it up by stripping everything they could find. So really, human bones or human burials, throw them in a ditch or bury them over it so you don't get a disease, often get burned. So a lot of stuff disappears, unless it's in a swamp. There was a colleague when I was much younger, this is a site in Ukraine, that battles fought in the swamp, and swamps preserved all sorts of stuff. And this just gives us an indication what possibly could be there unless it was stripped. But most of the battlefields that we run across don't have this kind of material culture. We just got a couple of things. They're also really big. I mean, we think of battlefields and campaigns, they take up huge amount of territories. For archaeologists who dig in units that are 3 feet by 2 feet or 6 meters by 6 meters, that's a really big hole, right? If you're thinking in square miles and square kilometers, that blows people away, and for most people, there really wasn't a way of actually doing it. Because, like I said, archaeologists like to dig holes deep in the ground. Battles are different. Battles are large amounts of people come together for a short period of time, a couple of hours, maybe a day or two, and then they go away. How many people come? If you look at most military campaigns, you want to find out where the largest population is at one spot, that's where the army is. Not only includes the men who are doing the fighting, you also have all the campfires, all the supplies, all the logistics behind it, all the horses. That's a huge concentration. They're going to lose stuff. I lose stuff all the time, And I'm just one person. And now imagine all of us together in a field, we're going to lose a lot of stuff. But it doesn't go deep in the ground, it's usually on the surface. Okay, historical records. By profession, I also have a Ph.D. in history, but historical records, often people take at face value, and that's wrong. Because nobody writes anything down just to write it down for posterity. Anybody do their taxes yet? Okay? I worked as a waiter when I was much younger in my life. Yeah, that was actually reported, right? Photographs, we're always staging what we put in, what we put out. So, yeah. Maps? Maps are wonderful. I love maps. I use them as much as I can, but the cartography is always wrong. A friend of mine is a geographer, says every map is wrong. The world is flat? No. Just making sure we're all on the same page here, right? The world is not flat. And if you take a map illustration, it's a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional thing. So it's going to be off. Even if you look at older maps, a town, okay, we've got general representation. Where the army's around it, that's all over the place. Somewhere over there, or somewhere by that creek, wherever that creek was. Topography itself changes. Erosion, right? Even well-known things sort of disappear, right? That's a nice example there. But for the most part, battlefields are considered safe because it's rural countryside. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to do plowing some stuff up. You're hitting the top zone of a couple of inches, under a foot, and it doesn't really move things around. There's been a lot of archaeological studies that actually says that plowing doesn't really move things more than like a foot or so. So even if it's been done for 200 years, it's pretty much in the same thing. Right? Okay. The other issue, it can be the long slide. There was no methodology actually trying to figure this stuff out. And then, if I had a thing, why do we need to study battlefields? We got books and records, right? What do you think? That's what we have to think. It's hard. We just had a great lunch, But what are the limits of historical documents? Sure. Politics. If I'm the winning general, the report says I'm the one who won it, right? If our side lost, it's his fault, right? And everything I write is about what he did wrong, right? What's the state of the author? I had a couple of students who've been on active duty come back and talk about writing after-action reports on their feet for 16 hours, going up and down some mountain in Afghanistan, and they got to write something down. You know what they write down? Exactly. First thing, just to get it done. It's not very accurate because they're exhausted, they're wanting to get some sleep, and they got to turn this stupid sheet of paper in. And it has to have 500 or 1,000 words in it. Senior generals, they don't really see what's going on. Often, you know, there's limits of command and control. Today we have radio communications, we pretty much know where the troops are. If you go back 100 years, 200 years ago, it's don't, right? There's somewhere over there, and that's where you have an aide-de-camp running out there back and forth trying to get information. I don't know what's going on the ground. When I write it close to the event, it's maybe sort of accurate. But most of our things that are written down, most of the records we get are much older. 40 years after the event. What were we doing 40 years ago? Sure. Oh, jeez, don't ask me, right? Most of us are on that same boat. We sort of pick and choose what was beautiful and gorgeous and forget the bad stuff. And smoke. Now, I usually deal with battlefields that are gunpowder age. And if you look at black powder, and if you ever shot black powder, it's a wonderful experience, right? You see one reenactor, 6 reenactors, a little puff of smoke. Now imagine there's 10,000 guys in that field. And they shoot for a couple minutes. You cannot see more than a couple feet in front of you. So I'm standing there and I'm writing and what's going on and which side is advancing at what time? I don't think so. It's going to be extremely disorienting. All right, here's the savior who sort of comes up with a new technology, Doug Scott. He's the guy on, and he's the one with the green hat. Him and Richard Fox come up with this methodology on Little Bighorn. They're going to have 2 pieces of new toys to play with. One is a metal detector. Metal detectors aren't really new. They've been used by archaeology. Well, mine detectors have been used since the late 1940s, World War II surplus stuff. Guys have been finding contact sites all over New York with them. But using a metal detector on a battlefield specifically, nobody really thought of doing. And Doug's really the one who pioneers this idea. And the other thing is a global positioning system. It's relatively new technology. At this point, I can have a little device, and I can tell you where I am in the world within a couple of feet. Sure. Yeah, that's awesome, because your other option is using that thing. If you ever taken that through a field on a hot day or a cold day, those things are heavy. They take time to set up. They take time. They're perfect, right? If you just want to do a house or a building, they're a perfect tool. But they are not easy. They're not portable, and the amount of points you can do in an afternoon is relatively limited. A handheld GPS with a meter, plus or minus 5 meter accuracy, and you're looking at a field of 350 feet and 250 yards the other way, it's perfect. You can get 1,000 points in a day. All right, so I'll just go with the methodology of battlefield archaeology, just give you an idea how it works. An area is identified, and you have a bunch of people walk through it with those metal detectors. It's called sweeping the area. Some archaeologists like to put everything in the lines. Others, like me, is saying we can do it organically because it gives better sample cover. It is random. You do not pick up everything on the battlefield. You get a small sample of what is there. People have worked on the same battlefield for more than 20 years, and they're still from the same fields collecting information. So it is just a very small sample. We're getting maybe 3 to 5% of what's actually out there. Different detectors, different soil conditions, weather. I'm also tired. The amount of information you're collecting is continuously changing. It is a random thing. So we're getting a very small sample of what's out there. Sometimes you get a whole bunch of stuff together. Right, that's awesome, and you can identify it like a firing position. All these things are marked with using our GPS, right? And the same system is used all over the place. I've worked in the United States, I've worked in Europe, doing these same kind of metal detecting surveys. This is generally what you do. You tag, flag, and bag the item. You don't try to figure out what it is in the field because you often have volunteers who don't know what it is, and it could be something when you clean it up. And sometimes even people know what they're doing, you can't really see it in the dirt. Better to wash it and toss it in the lab. Don't try to do that in the field now. And then they're all weighed and measured and collected and made into a database in the lab. Now this information that you've collected, the scientifically collected information, along with the cartography, we're in a multidisciplinary. We're sort of not really doing history, we're not really doing traditional archaeology, we're not traditionally doing geography. It's a multidisciplinary approach of battlefield studies. So we have a general idea of knowing where people stood and what they were firing at, and usually the results of that. All right, so that's just an overview of battlefield archaeology. If you heard that before, great. If not, well, maybe you learned something. There's me with Doug and Dan Civilich. We've known each other for a number of years. This was at a conference. We were asked if we wanted to look at Blue Licks battlefield. All right, why conduct a survey? All right. There's always a couple of things in there. It costs money, it requires specific individuals, and then you got to figure out with all the plans and how it all fits in. So these are not randomly chosen things. So we always have a research question, all right? When you do one of these things, like what happened, what do we know? And in case of Blue Licks, it was going to be delisted as a battlefield park on the National Register because there's probably no information there. So they would have lost some funding, so really they wanted to push this through. And the other thing is the area's been built up as a park. They've got swimming pools, they've got ski ramps, they've got all sorts of things that have been built in this territory where the battlefield happened. And the other thing, it's a really short engagement. It's only a handful of guys that fired a couple rounds before they're massacred. So a lot of thinking at the time was, well, there's not going to be any evidence of the battle. All right. So then we went through these kind of steps, right? And this is generally what you do when you want to do a battlefield survey. You create your team, right? You find money, because that's unfortunately the critical thing these days. And then you get all the stamps and paperwork to make it happen. So thankfully I was able to grab my students who said, hey, I can go outside instead of listening to you in a classroom. This is Dan Civilich from Bravo. He's been doing battlefield archaeology even longer than I have. Most of his work is on Mammoth. He's got a group originally in New Jersey. It's called the Battlefield Restoration Archaeological Volunteer Organization. These are people who have an interest in metal detecting. And Dan himself is a computer engineer. And then we work with like different state officials. They're all come visit the park. You can see them, right? And then we found support, financial, to make it work. Okay, I love that face, right? Where do we start? Well, the monument says the battle was here. That's a good place. All right. But just to fill you in, the battle's fought in August of 1782. There's about 300 natives and 60 men from Butler's Rangers, and about 70 settlers from Kentucky militia. Yeah. And here's one of the great pictures that was done in the 1920s, 1930s. Here you see the natives sort of hiding in the woods dastardly, and the guys with light behind them being massacred. Great picture, fantastic art, but probably doesn't really reflect what happened, because you're seeing a very stylized interpretation of the battle. Based on the evidence that we recovered, more than likely, natives are actually in melee combat and not really using firearms. The colonists are the ones with the firearms. Here's the area itself. This works? Yeah, okay. All right, here's a river that goes around. It's called Blue Licks because of natural spring. It's a saltwater kind of thing, and animals have been here, and people have been collecting around there for thousands of years. Here's a river. Natives have been retreating after an attack on Bryan Station, which is in modern-day Lexington. And all the guys that show up, each want to show that they're more manly than the other, go after the natives. Daniel Boone, one of the survivors of the battle, says, no, maybe let's not do this. One of the local militia guys gets in the middle of the river, takes off his hat, waves a sword, and said, all men who are men, come follow me. And they're going to chase after the natives up and down these ravines. This is pretty steep territory. And by the time they get to the third ravine, the Indians are not really retreating. They have a nice location, and they charge and massacre the colonists. There's about maybe 3 to 5 minutes worth of combat that occurs. So we're talking best case scenario, each guy may fire 3 to 5 rounds. Not a lot of ammunition was spent. So we looked at the hilltop, nice and flat, and nothing. There's also, the park's got the Short's goldenrod. It's part of the buffalo trace. It's one of the few places in the United States where we actually have the Short's goldenrod surviving. The buffalo go through and eat the Short's goldenrod, and they poop it out. And that's where it grows, in these couple locations. So while we have to look for a battle that's got very few artifacts remaining, we also got to be very careful with the plants and not touch those plants, which made it fun. All right. But there are strips of surviving land, and lo and behold, we start finding little balls. Everybody knows what we want to find. Spanish silver quarter, the original quarter, right? Brass button, or like a uniform button, or since nobody's wearing really uniforms, a button. Brass finger ring, quite common the time period, and more furred balls. We didn't have that many balls, I think it's like 20-something altogether, and they're predominantly small caliber. The largest one was a 61 caliber, the smallest was a 48, the majority were in the 55 to 56 range. And then we got this one. Here we see the traces of cloth on the ball itself. So this looks like, okay, one of two ways of that cloth being there. One, it's a patch that was actually put in around the ball, and when it was fired, you'd have better accuracy. There'd be less windage there. The other thought was this was a target. Somebody was wearing this kind of weave pattern, and this is the impression on it. We tried to figure that out. We did some test firings, modern day reconstructions, and we were able to get the same kind of effect by putting a patch, linen patch on a ball, firing into a target and recovering that same kind of pattern on it. So more than likely when the weapon is discharged, the heat will actually melt a little bit of the lead and actually gets where the impression comes from. So it's sort of cool. There's our happy team. All right, what did we learn? The battle left a mark on the landscape. The battle took a whole bigger space than previously thought. It's not just that little hilltop right here. All right. And then the traditional historical interpretation that's developed since the 1880s is the army comes up this way and they form into these lines and the natives surround them this way. But if you look at our ammunition and all the firing, it seems like they sort of wandered this way up and tried to shoot at the natives up on this third ravine, and the natives massacred them. So what do we learn? You know, you got to preserve the site. We got only about 20-something balls. We got about 5% to 10% of everything that's been fired, which is sort of impressive. It's much bigger. Militia use small caliber weapons, nothing bigger, no 65s, no 70 caliber balls, and it's in a different location. Whew, that was one. All right. Now we're going to get to another one I'm going to talk about, the Battle of the Crater. This is different. First of all, there's a time difference. We're jumping into the 1860s, the American Civil War, and this is a big battle. That one, we talked about a few hundred men. We got a division, we got corps taking part in this one spot. It's huge, all right. It's considered one of the 6 most important engagements of the American Civil War. There's formal court-martials, there's all sorts of things legally that happen because of it, and it's also a site where the USCT, the United States Colored Troop, participate. The brigade is massacred by the Confederates, many after they've surrendered. So some people call it a war crimes location. All right, so the war's been dragging on at this point. 61, 62, 63, Gettysburg didn't happen. The Overland Campaign, it's becoming a meat grinder. Lee and Grant are facing off each other. Lee is trying to protect the Confederate capital, Richmond. Lee's trying to surround it. And supplies to Richmond to keep it going all seem to go through Petersburg, and that's where Grant's going to turn his attention. Initial attacks on Petersburg have sort of failed. The Union Army has gone through the Wilderness Campaign. Armies are worn out. Nobody's really wanting to charge. And they're trying to take precautions, and people started to dig in. Petersburg is trenches. It's trench warfare. It's something you'll see in Western Europe in about 50 years. Petersburg's got a lot of it, and it's a race to, oops, sorry, wrong button, trying to protect Petersburg with a series of trenches all the way around, and who can make more stuff? And clearly here the Union has the advantage. While it looks like this is going to go on forever, there are some Union miners that say, hey, I got a great idea. We're going to build this mine, put it under the Confederate works, fill it with dynamite, and watch it go boom. All right? Sounds like a great plan. Of course, you've got General Burnside, who I love, by the way, because not only his mustache, but he's got his name to carve it. and General Meade, who hate each other's guts, and Grant, who sort of approved the plan, but not really getting too close into the pot. They're continuously countermanding each other's orders, and the amount of gunpowder that's going to be used is significantly reduced. So the hole that they end up blowing is going to be a lot smaller than it was. They also change the troops. The USCT are supposed to lead the charge. They get some training. They get some orders. They get some ladders, which way to go. And then there's a belief that, well, if they fail, it'll look like really bad politically, so let's pull those out and put in another commander in place. Which one? Nobody wants to do it. They draw straws, and they get the guy who really is shell-shocked. He should not be leading anything. He spends the battle in a bunker somewhere drinking, never in the field. So it's sort of got disaster written all over. But, you know, maybe we'll get lucky, right? Here's the entrance to the mine that's been reconstructed. And the mine goes boom. All right, it's deafening. You can see it from miles away. Everybody's in shock. The initial assault, nobody knows what they're doing because the guys that are supposed to go forward have no clue. All right. Here's a Civil War truss map, really nice. There's Ferrero sitting there in his tent, not doing anything. All right, they're all supposed to go this way, and there's a breach in the line. Some guys wander around, some guys don't. We don't know. There's the USCT guys. That's actually at Petersburg before they actually go that way. Most of them survive. And then the battle occurs with a couple different phases until eventually they're thrown back into the crater itself. And for the next 50 years, we have the legend of William Mahone, who's become general, local Petersburg guy, who saves the Confederacy by driving them back and then massacring all those troops that are still there. After the war is over, that's what the terrain looks like. Not really flat. You can see the devastation. The owner of the property, Mr. Griffin, comes back, tries to farm. That doesn't really work. And all these tourists come looking at the hole, so he builds this tourist trap. Here we got, remains of individuals along with a couple of shells, little amphitheater here to go visit the crater itself. Does a little bit of tourist business in the 19th century. Also, a lot of veterans come, both Union and Confederate, visit, and he does all sorts of tours along with Mahone, who's right here in the middle with that wonderful white beard of his. All right, there's one African American standing off to the side. The other USCT is not really part of the story at this point. Right? This is Jim Crow South. In the 1920s, they built a golf course on the crater because Mr. Griffin has already passed. And what's a cool thing to put? A golf course. Yeah. Here's the crater. Here's the clubhouse. We'll make a road right from the major road here and go play some golf and go to the bar and that trap has a whole different meaning. Right? They also do some reenactments there. The big one is in 1937. You get thousands of people showing up to see how the South saved itself from the bad Yankees. All right. So the project area is here. There were two questions. I was contacted by the Cultural Resource Manager at the park, Julie Steele. We had talked about working on stuff in Europe and in Ukraine and the Crimea. Fortunately, the Russians had invaded. That summer plan didn't work out for me. So we came out with, hey, why don't you come down to Petersburg with some students and we can look at the Battle of the Crater. And there are two real major questions. One, is there anything left, given the fact it was a golf course and everything else? And two, how far did the Union advance? Because that is something the literature is all over the place. Like I said, the sources are scattered at best. There are a couple of maps. This is a Confederate engineering map that's done probably on the 15th of June, a couple of weeks before it. The Confederate artillery commander is wounded, gets out of Virginia, goes back home to Carolina, but this map magically survives. Most of the Confederate maps are lost. And then there are Union maps. This one was done by a National Park historian. The map of the actual earthworks, this is after the war's over. There's a Union guy who goes out and maps all that stuff. And it's on top of a modern topo area. So here again, this is Elliott Salient. That's where the crater itself was detonated. There's this line of defenses, which a number of historians said this is built sometime later because the siege continues at Petersburg after the Battle of the Crater fails. and here's a target where they're supposed to get to. So the Union goal is to get to this road, right? The Jerusalem Pike. Again, we got Bravo, because they wanted to come and dig. Who doesn't want to dig at Petersburg? And I brought some students. Found a lot of those. My students had no clue what those were. And now they're more than 50 years old and are considered eligible for the National Park Service. Thankfully, we did our service before we didn't have to record these. So the Civil War stuff. I mean, we found over 1,000 artifacts in the 5 days in the field. 776 were actually important artifacts, and this is the concentrations we're seeing of every little star there is an artifact that's from the Civil War era. So many lead balls. 340 to be exact. This is just a small arms collection. Again, we're seeing stuff like a concentration here, something going on here or here, and then a little bit up here. We got dropped and impacted mini balls. This is a standard that most people who do battlefield archaeology, drop is where I stood and I dropped the ball out of my pocket. And one that's impacted is, ooh, that's got some sort of damage to it. We started developing a new sort of classification because we're seeing a lot of these what we call high velocity impacted. Velocity is how much powder, what's the range, given that powder is pretty much the same all over you go. More likely balls that have been damaged to a degree that like 50% of the ball itself is gone. That's probably fired at a much closer range than something that here just had a little bit of damage or dropped, which has none. So we got sort of this 3-level classification. Looking at modern reenactors as well as the North-South Skirmish Association, Larry Babbitt provided us with some ammunition from different targets that were used by the North-South Skirmish Association. And clearly, based on the data that we got from him, the high velocity, it's probably under 50 yards that kind of damage took place. This does not look right. Oops, sorry about that. Anyway, here's all the numbers if you want high velocity, low velocity, but 227 of just these calibers. 68 are really big. They're obsolete by this time, but we've got a couple. Most things are 58 caliber, 57, 57.7 or 58 we lump together in one grouping, and then 56 caliber stuff, and then some things are just too mangled, there's too damaged to figure out what it is. We also got a lot of these cleaners. Cleaners were developed by the Union trying to reduce the fouling in the weapons. We got both Type 1, Type 2, Type 3. We actually got a lot of them, more than pretty much any other battlefield that's been looked at before. So clearly the guys that are using these, this is predominantly by Union, the Union armies issued these arms. When they're in that crater, it's sort of tight. I mean, they're running out of ammunition. It's supposed to be used as a cleaning kind of thing. Most Union troops throw them out. At the crater, they were using them until the end, so it's pretty intense firefight. We also have some older stuff, buck and ball, the traditional military arm of the U.S. And this one's still got 3 little dimples here. You can see where the buck was. The idea this would be like a shotgun blast. You get the little pieces of lead falling off, followed by the big ball. They were supposedly obsolete. Nobody's supposed to be using them, but we're finding them. And more likely, these are Confederates. Is it obsolete? Is a question I've been asking. And a lot of my colleagues are saying, well, maybe we're jumping the gun. Maybe it's not obsolete. This is something that's a close-range weapon, right? And it's far more devastating because you get 4 holes in somebody instead of 1. So maybe they're wanting to use this for a reason. And then we got this thing. Nobody's seen one of these before. For all the work that's been done on Civil War ordnance, this is sort of new. It's actually 2 mini balls that have a nail through it. You have striation showing it was fired. And we do have accounts of Confederate troops manning the lines, knowing that there are African-American troops on the other side, taking precautions against them, using sort of exploding ammunition or non-standard ordnance. This is no longer a gentlemanly kind of war. This is not something that honor-bound in the Southern myth suggests that you'd be doing. This is a very nasty piece of ordnance. If this didn't blow up in your musket or rifling because of the striations we're seeing here, whatever it hit, that person would not walk away from. So this is definitely a specially improvised piece of ordnance of hate. So it's sort of cool. Anyway, I also found Spencer cartridges. We do know there were 3 regiments in the Union Army that were issued Spencer rifles. And we definitely have evidence of them used at the crater. We also got the bullets. And here you got, sort of scattered around this area. We also got some Gardners. These are Confederate arms. Some shell fragments. This is a Schenkel shell, a 3-inch shell. And there's a, see, that's what the other table was supposed to look like. I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. All right, so those are the numbers that some people like to look at. But you see ordnance, all types. This was the area, like I said, was under siege for 8 months. Periodically, people would be using cannon to put holes in this direction. So you can't really tie one to the other. And there's a sort of distribution. Again, it seems that most of it's on this part of the battlefield. Nothing over here. And then there's some stuff that we found that's after the war. We found this gold button that's got Virginia. We got so excited, right? It's post-Civil War. It was probably a Confederate veteran showing off what he did. Somebody said maybe it's Mahone's button, because not that many people in the Confederacy or the post-Confederacy could afford a gold button. There were a handful of these things made, and we found one. It was sort of cool. Also stuff from the 37 reenactment, 30-on-6, stripper clips and cartridges. And we got park visitation and after World War II. We got a nice lipstick tube there. And then my favorite little toy, David Crockett frontier badge that some kid lost. So what do we learn? Some people like to collect toys and bullets, and if you go into any gift shop outside of National Park, you'll find barrels full of them for $5 or $10. Take your pick of a bullet. That's actually information that can be useful, so don't simply dig to collect. And documentation, its location is the key point. That's what we're really looking for. Talk to anybody who does this kind of stuff. 99.9, what we want to know is where was that item found. Without it, it's pretty much useless. It's a cool thing, but if you give me GPS coordinates, I can put on a map and I know exactly what's going on. We also learned 2 other things. Yeah, there's stuff there. Hasn't been destroyed. Union advance is actually much closer than previously thought. And we also identified 3 phases of the battle. This spot right here, this is getting to the Jerusalem Plank Road, right, not that far away, 250 yards, we got a firing position of somebody using a Spencer. This one up here is closer, but it's just one. I'm not going to put my reputation on line with just one casting. But if you get 3 here and there's another one down here, it looks like some guys had gone all the way up to the artillery that's up here. We're skirmishing. There's a command of a Confederate captain who's manning the gun, says, please send infantry support. I'm going to get overrun. And I think this is what's happening. This is like the first phase of the battle, which is up here. And we can sort of pick one of these 3 Spencer rounds are coming from a particular one of 3 Union regiments. The rest of the stuff we can't figure out because everybody's using the same ammunition. We can't pick a side. But clearly, we've got a firing line here. We have a good description of the 47th New York, which has been decimated as a regiment. Their colonel's gone, their lieutenant colonel's gone, their major's gone. They're commanded by a captain. It used to be a German regiment. All orders are in German. 2 months ago, they shifted to English, which suggests they got a whole bunch of guys coming in that are filling up the numbers. They're the one that's sort of leading an assault, and it fails miserably. There's a court-martial inquiry. Everybody's acquitted. But this is probably where this firefight happens. This is Elliott's brigade pretty much holding off the 47th and the rest of those guys that followed with them. When the 47th take off, everybody else does too. And I think this is where it is. That's what we found. This is that initial skirmishers working their way up. And then this is where Mahone comes and pushes into the crater, and then this is the final stand at the crater itself. So that's really much my talk for today. I'm sure you guys might have questions or something, or thoughts. Yes?
How close is it to the military base at Petersburg?
Fort Lee actually is butts against the Petersburg Battlefield National Park. So
How long is that?
it's created in World War I as a training base to get guys ready to go overseas. They built a whole series of trenches for training, which is really confusing. At least National Park records in the 1950s confused them all the time. These days I have a pretty good idea because they're a little bit different in construction.
Well, and one more question to that.
Shoot.
The reenactors that were there, so how long was it a reenactment site?
Well, we know there was a reenactment done in the 1880s, one of the earliest ones out there. It was like a play kind of thing. There was others that happened in the beginning of the 20th century. The 37 one is the one everybody talks about because that had like 10,000 or 12,000 people taking part in it, and they had about another 20,000 people watching it.
But then how do you separate the ammunition they would have used during the Civil War from the stuff at that reenactment in the 80s?
Well, that's because they're using a 30-on-6 cartridge, and that doesn't come out till about
But they
1900.
couldn't have had some of the older equipment still?
No, we have pretty good evidence of what troops that are actually being used in those reenactments. There were National Guard units, there were soldiers from Virginia, some South Carolina, and it's pretty clear that everybody's using an 03 Springfield. That's a standard military armor of the time. World War I's over, there's a lot of surplus stuff around. Right? Yes, sir.
As far as funding on the Crater project, what was the funding on that, and how much time, and how many people were actually involved to wrap up that whole project?
Okay, well, the project is ending now. So we did this in 14. We did the field work. Unfortunately, with any kind of archaeological project, 10% of in the field, 90% in the lab. So it's a lot of time and energy to do it. And National Park Service is a multi-tiered bureaucracy. So while the regional park is very happy with everything we've done, we hit print on the final report to them last October, and they liked it and everything else. It's still at the regional level being observed for final commentary. So it takes time. National Park Service does not have money to do all this stuff, and literally it was my connection with the park director at Petersburg, who I've known for 20 years or something like that. She really wanted to have this done. We were looking for a project. We sort of put our resources together. There are CRM firms that charge a whole lot of money to do this kind of stuff. I said, look, I'll bring my students down. You put us up. Hopefully give us some beer and pizza, right? And we worked for a week for them. And then all this stuff came out of our own pockets. So the university, when we started 5 years ago, had a little bit of money, but we don't have that anymore. So it's financially difficult to do one of these large projects. Unfortunately, Petersburg doesn't have a Friends organization because it's a national park. Yes, sir. Ma'am, sorry.
Just to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Does archaeology have, battlefield archaeology have an end point, or is it always going to be endless? There's always going to be projects out there. And follow up on top of that by saying, domestically, what's going on right now in your field? And internationally, is there spots that we really want to get funding and hit? And could you tell us what those are?
Well, it's a growing field, all right? There is the American Battlefield Protection Program, which was created by Congress after the fiasco with Manassas, right? They wanted to build Disneyland there, and then they ended up buying the property for huge prices. They realized that we need to find where these battles are, where these battlefields, what do we want to protect. We don't know that. We've got to get some money out there. There have been different stages. I know they had a high turnover with the American Battlefield Protection Program. Almost everybody I know there has left in the last 6 months. And there have been a lot of retirees and other people who have, well, left. Let's just put it that way. Right? So I'm not sure where they're going with that. There are a number of people who do this and write on this. There are a couple of programs that people can get degrees, specifically in battlefields. There's one in England. Tony Pollard runs. He's been running for 20 years. He said he's still taking graduate students, which means he's not going to retire for another 5. Right? Steve Smith in South Carolina is still doing, he's still taking students as well. They have graduate programs that specifically do this. There's a handful of us that do it. I mean,
Internationally, is there one project going on?
oh, there's a lot of projects. This is just the stuff that I'm doing in the States. I've got a project in Ukraine where I'm looking at nationalists attacked a slave labor camp and executed the Gestapo there. We did that last summer. And I've got another project that I'm working on in Germany, Leipzig, the largest Napoleonic battle. We're looking at just a part of it, Holzhausen. And we're going into our second season this summer there. And there's a website if you want to check it out. It's called Leipzig Dig. It's on Facebook. surprised I have a student doing that social media stuff. That's not my thing, right? But people apparently like it because, you know, they look at it. So, yes, sir.
You talked earlier about the fog of war and its interpretation on battles and things like that. And with so much being written without the tool of technology, how do you shift the old inaccurate type reporting of a battle? How do you shift the education based on the technology?
Well, there's two levels of doing that. One is actually at the park itself. So at Blue Licks, they've changed their signage, they've put up different information out there. So if you're visiting the site, which is a great little park, all right, if you're in Kentucky, you can see the DAR monument, you can go swim in the swimming pool, they have a really good catfish kind of thing in the lodge, right? And then you can walk the battlefield. And now when you walk it, you'll see that this is where the battle took place and some of the information that we've collected. So on a level that it shares that information with the public history aspect, that's sort of being incorporated continuously. The academic thing is a different kettle of fish, because there are some people that are very set in their ways that really don't want to change. I'm like that, right? Because I'm getting older and I don't want to change things. I don't like change anymore, right? But so it's a growing discipline, and there are academic things that are coming out. There are different books that talk about battlefield archaeology. You know, there's another one that I've got an article coming out from South Carolina and partisan warfare and unconventional fights, about mostly U.S. stuff. There's a lot of things that are out there these days, literature. There was a book that came out, Battlefield Archaeology in the War of 1812, a couple of years ago. So there is a growing field, and there are people that are acting, that working in the field. So. Yes, ma'am.
When you have battlefields, say early American ones that are in Manhattan or around Boston, and they bump into them during development for, say, a high-rise, how long can you get a stay so you can actually do the work?
Well, that's a New York State SHPO office question. Something in an earlier life, I used to review reports there. 25 years ago, that general recommendation would be, well, it's just a battle, you can't learn anything, and don't do anything. Right? I can't comment on what it is these days, but these things evolve, right? Because academia and scholarship it's a growth field, right? We generally know something earlier, and then we add to it, and then we do, okay, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. So, you know, it depends on the permit process, right? And New York City also has their ordinances, so there can be something different. But remember, there's not going to be a lot of stuff. You want an area that's predominantly open. It's really hard to destroy a battlefield. Let me just change that a little bit, because you can find traces of it surviving, because it's all it is little pieces of bullets, right, for the most part. And those preserved. Not that many people really wanted to collect those if it's 1960. I'm convinced somebody was with a metal detector at Petersburg. The Crater Battlefield in the 60s and the 70s was an early metal detector. We got no belt buckles. We got none of the big brass shiny things in the Civil War that should be all over the place. We got lots of bullets. Nobody wanted them, right? So parts preserved. Even if you know, as a colleague in Sweden, Carson, we did a project on Poltava, 1709 battle. He did this thing where there was this battle in Sweden that they actually stripped the earth off and moved it to a different site. And he said, okay, let's see if I can find any evidence. He went to the place where they moved the dirt, and sure enough, it's coming out with bullets. So it's really hard to completely destroy it. I did another battlefield from the 17th century in Eastern Europe. There's a World War I battlefield on top of it. And while we're finding a lot of World War I stuff, we actually were finding the 17th century stuff there too. So it's really hard to eradicate it completely. It's just the level of information you can collect. Ideally, everything would be pristine, and I could find, you know, complete musket lock. That would be awesome. But I still can get a story just from the bullets themselves. Yes, sir.
Did you work on the P. Ridge archaeological battlefield study?
I didn't do the P. Ridge. Only thing I've done with Civil War was this, a couple of training grounds, and a little round top of Gettysburg a couple of years ago.
And you mentioned the Battlefield Trust Program going out. Have you approached the...
They have their funding. Their interest is predominantly purchasing property.
Yeah.
So that's why the ABP was originally supposed to fill in that hole to do that survey work on any property that is being purchased. Yes, sir.
Your focus is on the battlefield and the artifacts from that. And you showed a few other things, the lipstick and whatever, the pop tops, but percentage-wise, how much other stuff did you find, and do you keep that as well?
Well, I think it's part of the story, right? Because I think, I'm always interested in battlefields as they develop over time, right? So what happens after that event, what takes place? And you get a lot of, like, if you want to talk about, how America becomes like a tourist thing in the 1950s, already puts, the kids in the backyard of the Packard and goes and looks at these locations. This is sort of evidence of that, right? How did that lipstick happen to get there? How did the kid lose it? There's a story, which I think is really cool. I can't tell you percentages because I really didn't focus on it. And I didn't know most of the stuff is the Civil War material that we were recovering at Petersburg. Other sites, it depends. I've done other sites where you get more touristy stuff, almost it's all touristy stuff, and very few that's actually from that encounter.
But do you still mark it and bag it?
I bag and tag everything, because I can always throw it away in the lab. It's easier for me to do. And it's also really enjoyable, let me tell you. Yes, sir?
It's data. Archaeologists coming years from now might be curious about the post-war deposition of artifacts like that.
Yeah.
You can't predict what's going to be valuable.
Exactly. I mean, we even, like at Petersburg, we documented every nail we found. Maybe somebody wants to do fence lines, maybe want somebody to do where they built a stance for the reenactment. I'm not sure. My job, which I see, is to document everything.
Get the
Right?
data,
Let somebody else deal with it.
come up with a good way to.
Exactly. I write reports for all of these projects. And when I'm done with the report and all the papers are done, then I say take a break. 6 months later, I'll look at it and like, okay, what do I want to get out of it? An article, maybe a book, something of that nature. So.
Where do you house all this stuff?
Well, the process is extremely similar around the world, right? You have a battle, somebody has an idea of maybe doing some research on it, you talk with the people with the stamps, right? And the paperwork saying, I give you permission to do this. It could be a state park, it could be private ownership, whatever, you get that documentation. And part of that is always a discussion, what do I do with this stuff? I want it in my basement. I don't have space, right? An archaeologist gave me stuff 30 years ago, and they passed, and I don't know what to do with it, right? I don't want it. I can use some of it for teaching, but most of it is superfluous. And I think it's better to find an institution that's going to house it. For the National Park Service, they have their curatorial staff. We were starting an artifact for Petersburg was 10,600 the catalog started with, right? So they have 10,600 stuff before our 700 something got it added to their collection. So every institution has something like it. And usually when you work with an established park or organization, there's somebody who's going to keep that material.
So at the state park, they would have.
The state park actually put all that stuff in display. Petersburg, they have so many bullets and shell fragments. They're going to put that special ordnance piece out and a little slide with it, as well as a three-dimensional map of the area that our students built. But the rest of it is going into storage. Like 90% of all museums, all the good stuff is mostly in storage, and they have a small percentage on display for people to see. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Tell us about DNA on these bullets that you have tested, human DNA.
Yeah. At Leipzig, we actually have a project. We're looking for possible DNA or markers. We did thermoluminescence, which is this liquid you put it in, and you try to rub the bullet and see if it glows and see if there's anything there. We had 0 results on the stuff we pulled out of Leipzig. Although we did find a toothbrush, one of the toothbrushes we were using was used by somebody beforehand, and we were running short, and man, that thing glowed like a strobe light. So the test works. It's, in certain circumstances it appears to be working. It's just an evolving technology, and it's something that is only in its infancy right now. It's also very expensive. There are labs that actually will do it, but I really don't have $10,000 usually to throw out a sample. So. Yes.
Where in Ukraine?
Well, let's see. We did Zborya, which is in western Ukraine, Poltava, which is in eastern Ukraine, Zhoty Voda, which is in central Ukraine, and we had a Crimean War project, but that didn't go anywhere.
You speak Russian or Polish or anything?
Ukrainian, right? So, yes.
A lot of battles historically took place on or near the edge of the water, whether it's a lake or a stream. Do you get into any underwater survey for artifacts?
I haven't. Larry Babbitts is the only person I know who's actually done something like that, and he's actually done naval reconstructions. looking at battles and trying to find concentrations of iron, which he thinks are broadside.
Just thinking of whether it's bullets or gun, small arms or whatever that get lost in the water, next go back to battlefield insertion.
It's a possibility, but, it's hard to dig in a swamp. I did some work at Betestex many, many years ago, the first one I showed, and it was awesome preservation, but it was stinky, it was hot, and it was nasty. And the older I get, the less I want to do those kind of things. There are younger people out there, so.
I think Jamestown was found in the river, did they have to move, I don't know if you know anything about that, but I know there was archaeology in the river for Jamestown port. They actually moved the spots they had designated for.
Right, I mean, that's a little bit different project than Battlefield, so. You can't do that with 5,000 square miles. Any other questions? I'll be around. Come and talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was wonderful. Really cutting edge research and work here. Before we start our break, I'll fill you in on some things, some updates. Plans for next year. Beginning August 5th, it's the 75th anniversary of the Fort Ontario Emergency Refugee Shelter. Fort Ontario was the only camp or shelter for victims of the Holocaust in the United States during World War II. It lasted from August 5th of 1944 to February 5th, 1946. A very unique historic site. It's one of the bases for the fort potentially becoming a national park. We'll study that plus its general history. We're going to be beginning commemorative events in August, celebrating and interpreting the history of the shelter. August 5th will be the refugee reunion commemorative ceremonies with Jewish groups and delegations around the country. September 3rd will be the open house, which celebrates the ending of the 30-day quarantine when the public, the townspeople come in and meet the refugees inside the fence. Fort Ontario is where the Holocaust came to America. For the first time, Holocaust victims met American citizens at that fence at the fort. Also, it's where the press discovered Holocaust stories that they could relate to, people with real stories. So a very unique, significant history of Fort Ontario. So next year, I'd like to plan the conference around the Holocaust shelter history, and recreate, tell the story of the Americans in the Holocaust exhibit at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. It's a temporary 3-year exhibit. The last gallery in the exhibit is the Fort Ontario Emergency Refugee Shelter Gallery. The last artifact is a section of the fence, the iconic chain link and barbed wire top fence from the fort. It's the last artifact the public experiences there at Washington. So I'd like to bring the curator, the historians, Hadley exhibits people, anyone involved with it, and also tell the shelter story with it as well. And bring up Rebecca Erbellick, who wrote Rescue Board, the story of the War Refugee Board, and the War Relocation Authority, which administered the shelter. So that's what I'm thinking about for next year, okay, in April. All right. Tonight, afterwards, just in case anyone's sticking around 6:37, we're all going to gravitate over to Steamers, the room, the breakfast nook just beyond it, and have informal dinner together in case anyone's staying in town, being around. All right? Good conversations and things. Around the room, we have Continental Arms collectors with a wonderful display of Civil War and Indian Wars cavalry equipment. All right? Rich Barbudo with his books. Jack Frost back there with maps or models of Fort Brewerton and the Royal Blockhouse at Sylvan Beach. We're going to those places tomorrow on the bus trip. Paul Beers back there, Tom Frost and the gang from 147th New York. The 147th New York was one of the immortal regiments of the Civil War. It's from Oswego. They were trapped at the railroad cut. We had the desk of the Lieutenant Lyman, the adjutant, and a collection of his documents produced, including the list of the killed and wounded at Gettysburg with the regiment. All right? And Arthur Simmons back there has a lot of the maps we're going to be going through tomorrow. That'll be Oswego County Promotion of Tourism. And then there's Harvey back there, the rabbit, and also the 50-50. The 50-50, you'll get up, it's up to about $150 right now. Okay, so we have two things going on back there. So if you want to see Amy and Harvey back there and get a deal on some chocolate or some cash, be my guest, and we'll meet back here in 30 minutes. Thank you.
But I have to,
Oh, I forgot about the cookies.
what happened to barbecue? I was looking for you.
There, across the stage. It's not like it's capitalizing you.
Someday.
Yes.